Hello, hello, everyone. So today what we are going to get into is talking about some actual concrete changes and some things that people have been trying to demand and the actual influence of the Enlightenment. And we have some enlightened monarchs, some people we're going to talk about that are going to make some changes here. And this is in Central and Eastern Europe mainly is really where we're going to see the influence of the Enlightenment. Okay, so what we are going to talk about is the era of absolutism is ending, but I mean, it's kinda. This period from 1715 to 1789, the old order is going to get challenged. If you look on the right there, it's like take a minute, just pause the video and look at all the things that these rulers do. And what you're going to start to see is that these rulers, in order, if they want to contain or keep their power, they are going to have to be willing to give some things up, but at the same time, we're going to get some issues long term with certain peasant groups, because I have there on the body agriculturalism. What we have to understand is that still, despite all these changes, and we're eventually going to get to industrialization later, everybody's got to eat, right? And during this time period, we have a real focus on tremendous agricultural growth, but the problem is all that land is really owned by a small number of aristocrats, in which they kind of do whatever they want in many cases to the people living on that land, and people are going to get tired of it. And again, when you make up 95% of the population, there are some things that you might be able to do, and so we're going to start to see some changes coming. And there really were some new thoughts on law again, and we talked about these things, this idea of, natural rights, and that there should be privileges that are granted to all people, things like equality before the law, and that people should be represented before the law, freedoms of speech and press and assembly, and probably more important, people's property rights, which is kind of crucial because people want the opportunity to have stuff, and they also want the opportunity to be able to keep their stuff. And in the end, we actually see this very clearly in the preamble to the American Declaration of Independence, which we'll be talking about separately, but we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among those are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which of course sounds kind of much more fun than property. But this idea that these governments need to provide those things, and if they don't, we just might have a problem. So one of the first places I want to start is Prussia. Now, the interesting thing about Prussia is kind of going to be like all about the military, and a lot of people often assume that, like, if things are all about the military, then individual rights won't be there. And we're going to see some developments here in Prussia that's interesting. Now, Prussia does become a country for the first time at this point, and we've talked about that before, and they are led by their first king, Frederick I, who rules in Prussia from 1701 to 1713. And what he's going to do is create a bureaucracy known as the General Directory that's going to run the government. These departments, if you will, are going to supervise the police and the military and economic and financial affairs. And the key thing is that the workers, or those who work in this, will be trained and educated, okay, in the civil service. And you have a quote here that these workers were trained and needed to serve the king with life and limb, with goods and chattels, with honor and conscience, and surrender everything except salvation. The latter is reserved for God, but everything else must be mine. So the idea is that we're going to put these people in that are wholly loyal to the state, so they can carry out those things. Now, they are monitored closely, but they are also encouraged to do exactly that, their job. And the reason why this is kind of an Enlightenment ideal is this idea is that the king is kind of willing to give up power a little bit to allow people opportunities to get more freedoms and to run their own stuff, quote unquote, if you will. However, though, there is a big-time issue within society because it is very stratified. On the right, you see that's the Prussian military. But I want to point out this guy is very crucial, because what you have at the top of the social structure in Prussia are a group of people known as the Junkers, and they are landed aristocracy, okay? They own huge amounts of land, they have tons of serfs, they are interesting because they are the ones that run the military. So that officer you see there in the front is a junker, which means you can't all of a sudden pass all these laws against the junkers because they run your military. So these rulers have to be very careful on how they're going to do things because these guys have the access to the military. Okay. Now, the big focus for like Frederick and others is going to obtain loyalty. And so what they did is they did favor the military. And a quote about Prussia was not a country with an army, but an army with a country, which served as a headquarters and food magazine. So the idea that Prussia and these junkers will be able to control everything, and their military is really going to be of the most, the most utmost of importance. Now, who's the rest? Well, you do have the middle class, which are craftsmen and merchants, and things for them are pretty decent. Merchants would actually have opportunities to make money and actually, gain some rights or even maybe gain a title because they are viewed so positively, I guess you could say. So that's going to be one thing to kind of look at for them. And then peasants, however, have zero rights, and this is going to cause a problem later on. I have here, this is your medieval, the serfs toiling under, an overseer, and that's really what it was. Serfs are not allowed to leave anywhere. They're not allowed to do anything. The only thing that we would see out of this class is every now and again, if merchants were really cool, Frederick might actually appoint a minister for them. And so that's going to be okay. So I'm establishing what it's like. Frederick's giving up some power, so it's not necessarily 100% just rule by the king here, but we're going to have some concerns. And that's going to change quite a bit with Frederick II, or a man known as Frederick the Great. Now, this guy he was very educated, and he was buddies with Voltaire. Voltaire lived part of his life in Prussia and was actually part of the court. And Frederick kind of looked at his role as he was the servant of the country, okay? And his job was to basically do what was best for the country. Now, it doesn't mean that he's going to give, individual rights for everybody, but he's going to look at some things in that if I can provide some things for my people, we can maybe calm some things down. And so he definitely does some reforms. There's a picture on the right of Frederick walking around and hanging with Voltaire. So one of the first thing he does is he is going to establish a single law code. Remember, Prussia was made up of a bunch of different areas, and those areas in many cases had different laws and opinions on things, and so he's actually going to get rid of that, and so that's a good thing, and just get one solid law code. And he is going to grant some limited freedom of speech and press and complete religious toleration. Prussia was part of the Holy Roman Empire. That had been really involved in all of those religious wars. And so here you get a chance where it actually is going to back off that a bit and will calm some people down. It's not full freedom of speech and full freedom of the press, but we're starting to get there. And one of the big things he actually does is he outlaws torture. Now, the only exceptions were in cases of treason and murder, so I don't know really how they use it, but so we're getting a singular law code, we're getting some freedoms, we're outlawing torture, and then he's still going to have some conservative things, okay? He's not going to outlaw serfdom. He's not going to allow peasants any rights to, or commoners actually, to have any rights as far as being in like political office or something like that. Like that is most certainly not going to be allowed. And government positions will be hereditary. Now, he's the great because he really is going to also expand the power of his country, and that's where the military comes in. Their army will get up to the point of 200,000 men. They're actually going to take a piece of Austria called Silesia, so they're going to expand. They're also going to get involved in the War of Austrian Succession and the 7 Years' War. We're going to talk about those separately, and they're going to come out on the good side of that. And it is because of that that he becomes, or that Prussia becomes a world power. And what's important to understand is they do this with a little bit of freedom for people. Not a lot, just a little bit. Now, someone who is going to start to do some interesting things, however, will be in Austria. We'll get some changes, and I have two rulers to talk about in Austria, and that being Maria Theresa and Joseph II. Now we still have the Habsburgs. They're still, hanging out. Okay, they had consolidated the kind of eastern provinces of the Holy Roman Empire into one country to gain a little bit of strength, although they're landlocked, so that's going to be a problem later. And so after the War of Austrian Succession, which again we'll talk about separately because we can't do it all at one time, Maria Theresa is going to come to power. And she's going to revamp some organization, and she's going to do some things that really is going to be kind of new. One, she's actually going to start to tax the upper classes and not revolve solely around the middle and lower classes. And that's going to be brand new. And that's a level of equality that comes that's really, really important. She's also going to divide the land into provinces and then further in the districts, and everything is run by royal administrators. But what's important by that is in understanding this, you see that people are going to have opportunities to interact with their government on a little bit of a local level, because just like we have, the state of New Jersey might not understand what Marlton wants, and the president certainly might not understand what Marlton wants, but that's why we have like a mayor and a town council and stuff. So when you do that, it's going to be really effective. She's also going to do things like centralize the language and the currency and weights and measures, and this stuff is really important because you're going to get folks that kind of can interact with each other a lot more. And then she will require 7 years of military service for serfs. Now, that might sound bad on the outside, and it is kind of tough, but if you are in the military, it does give you an opportunity to move up a little bit. Okay, and again, as I said, the military reforms are going to continue to grow. I guess I had to double that up. Now, she's also going to change some things on law. She's going to create a central system of courts and appeals that actually takes power away from the nobles, that the judges that are involved here are not part of the nobility, so as a result, they're going to have limited power, which they're not a really big fan of. And she's going to really lessen violence against people, in meaning that she is going to forbid torture, burning at the stake, and things along that line. As well as she really expands schooling, and most importantly, state-run schools for men. So sorry, ladies, you're not quite there, but in that schooling, peasants could go to school and serfs could go to school. Now, as we all know, education is a way for you to get better. But on the flip side, they're not perfect because she's very anti-Semitic, and you see a picture there on the right. In 1744, she kicked all of the Jews out of Austria. She is still devoutly religious and Christian, and she's not having any of that, and unfortunately, that's going to be a downside. She is going to be followed by Joseph II, who I have here, good and bad, and the things that he does are really good. The problem is he doesn't do it in an effective way, okay? So, for instance, he is going to abolish serfdom, and then those same peasants so you're no longer serf, you're a peasant, which is important to know because peasants are free, and he's going to give them land and give them hereditary rights to that land. That's kind of super awesome. He's also going to abolish the death penalty. He is going to make sure that commoners have equal rights before the law, meaning that penalties for laws and things like that are only, or they only apply, or they apply to not only, but like if you're a noble or if you're a peasant, you get the same penalties and all that type of stuff that you don't have to worry about. Like if a peasant commits a crime, they get a lot worse stuff, but the noble doesn't. No, it's for everybody and complete religious freedom, and it's like, oh my god, this is totally awesome. And unfortunately it doesn't work because he did it so fast. The peasants actually don't like it because they almost don't know what to do. You're also going to see issues with the nobility is going to basically hate him, and you're going to get some rebellions that are going to come down the road, and he couldn't quite get his administration in there. So here's a guy, so we have like a little bit with the Fredericks, right? And then we have more with Maria Theresa, and then we just try to do a ton of it with Joseph, but you have to do it in increments sometime and take all parties into effect. I want equality for all people too, but sometimes if you go like crazy with it, you get too many people rebelling at the same time. So nonetheless, it's not going to be super effective in the long run. But when we look at these things, we see these monarchs are quote unquote enlightened, but the question is, how enlightened were they? And that's something we'll talk about in class. So I'll see you guys soon.